Okay, welcome everyone. Those of you who are here live, well done for getting here, and welcome those who are watching on catch up. So this is our second call in the collective series, the 3-month collective. And last time we looked at self-love and self-care, self-acceptance and all those things. And that was the theme for October. The theme for November that I'd like us to explore is finding and keeping healthy love. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. And I'd also like that to be the focus in the chat. Although you can put in the chat whatever in the Telegram group, you can put in the group whatever you want and ask whatever question you want. And I encourage you to keep up the self-love, self-care thread as well. But particularly our focus this month is on finding and keeping healthy love. How this will work is I've got some thoughts to share with you. I will ask you some questions. You can answer them in the chat. You are welcome to unmute and answer them out loud, and know that you will be recorded if you do that, and it will be shared with our small group of 14 women. And if time, I'll do a breakout room for you to speak to each other, and then we'll have some questions at the end, and I'll briefly switch the camera off as well at the end. Okay. I'm just going to do a very short grounding, literally for 2 minutes. So I know it's hard when we're engaged with tech and computers and phones, and some of you might be traveling, but wherever you are, I'd just like you to try and ground and center for a moment. So try and be present, come into the room, come into the space, feel your feelings. So I invite you to close your eyes. If you can. And then connect with your breath. And you might want to do that by noticing your breath, how it travels through your nose or your mouth. Notice how your chest rises, or your belly goes in and out. And I'd like you to try your best to let go of all the things that are traveling through your mind, perhaps at fast pace. And just come into the moment and into your body. I'd like to invite you to bring an open heart, and an open mind. And while you're here, just notice what's in your heart right now. Maybe notice what's in your body. Maybe that's stress, anxiety, tension. Maybe you feel relaxed. Maybe you feel tired. So notice what's in your body. And then notice what's in your heart, if you can. Just have a little rummage around inside. And also perhaps notice how often you allow yourself this gift of stillness, peace, connection. Is it once a day? Is it 10 times a day? Is it not every day? And notice how you might benefit from doing this. Okay, bring your focus back to your breath. Take a few deep breaths, and then when you're ready, come back to the room. If it's easy to do so, would anyone just like to type in the chat any feeling words that they connected with? Not the story behind them, just how you feel, or you can unmute very briefly and speak them if that's helpful, if that's easier. Just to identify how we're feeling. This also helps with connection. Okay, so we have a mix, some calm, some stress, some distracted. Everything is welcome. Gratitude. Yeah, feels good to take a breath. Thank you. So on this topic, I want to start by sharing a little experience from this weekend that I hope will help you understand your own journeys as well. It's about how much we believe we deserve love. So as many of you know, I did a TEDx on Thursday. Even saying that makes me feel anxious. It didn't go perfectly. It didn't go to plan. I found that very difficult. I am a perfectionist, usually top of the class. I wasn't top of the class and it didn't go well. Hopefully the final video will be good, but it was a challenge for many reasons. And it prompted a lot of feelings around, well, it actually triggered my trauma around needing to be perfect in order to feel safe. And I did some breath work yesterday. I had a yoga session, and then I did some breath work in a group with some women locally, and that was wonderful. And after about 20 minutes of breath work, that's like really focused, deep breathing, I got to a deep place of tears, like lots of tears, and a very, very deep sense that I don't deserve to be loved. I don't deserve love. And I share that because, as many of you know, I have done 20 years of healing, growth, personal development, addiction recovery, therapy. And I am in a healthy and loving relationship. And I have been with my now husband for 10 years, married for 4, together for 10. But that's how long it is taking me to heal the sense that I am not lovable. That very early sense that I got, perhaps in the womb, just out of the womb, when my parents weren't connecting to me, when they were distracted, when they were addicted, when they divorced, the sense that I picked up that I'm not enough, I'm not lovable. And I've been working on this for 20 years and it's still there. So I share that because, you know, I know some of you well. I know some of you have had challenging experiences in your early lives of loss, of chaos, of violence, of not being seen, not being heard. And those experiences leave their wounds. And it takes time to overcome them. And I know many of us, when we're dating, we're like, when? When is it going to go well? When am I going to find the person? When am I going to stop having these unhealthy patterns? I would encourage you. It doesn't mean to say that you have to do 20 years of healing, but that it takes time. So I say that to encourage you to continue your journey and to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and to really try and get to that place. How lovable do I feel? Because and I'll explore this with you in a moment, but because obviously if we are looking for love from a place where we don't feel enough or lovable, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be impossible, because I clearly, when I met my husband 10 years ago, I had done 10 years of work on myself, but I still had lots more to go, and I have lots more to go still till the end of my life. So we don't have to be perfect before we find a healthy relationship, and we don't have to cure or heal those wounds, but it takes time. It takes time. So I encourage you to continue your journeys and to have patience with yourself and compassion for yourselves, which is something I really struggle with. Patience and compassion. And I just want to read something from Donna Lancaster. Has anyone heard of Donna Lancaster? She's an author, coach. This book is called Wise Words for Women. I met her, and I've got a signed copy. Now, you won't all relate to this, but try and relate it to your own experience. She talks about drama and chaos in her early life. You might have had loss or neglect, or you might not know what happened. You might not still have connected with what happened. Like many of you, I grew up in an environment with a lot of drama and chaos. My father, a violent alcoholic, and my mother, a love addict. Rarely would a day go by when there wasn't some kind of argument or explosions of rage. In our house, things got thrown and smashed up, and sometimes so did people. It was a scary, unsafe place to grow up in, that's for sure. I often call my childhood a war zone because it felt like that to a small, frightened child. Big people who were meant to love and protect us, but were instead completely out of control and hurting each other and us. With this as a launching pad for my life, it's hardly surprising that I would go on to seek out dysfunctional relationships of my own. I had become so used to the high levels of activation this created in my nervous system that it was like a drug. Wherever I went, I would unconsciously seek out drama, violence, and chaos. And if it wasn't there, I'd create it myself. It all felt so familiar, painful but familiar. And the word familiar comes from family, by the way. I associated love with pain and connection with hurt. It was all I knew. And if anyone remotely healthy came towards me, I would send them packing whilst shouting, boring, at their backs. Drama indeed. And then one day I simply couldn't bear it, and so the healing began. That's an abridged version. But what in summary, she's talking about what we knew as small people. So maybe we knew distance, parental distance. Maybe we knew violence or chaos. Maybe we knew loss, avoidance, neglect. Maybe what was familiar to us was being ignored, neglected, feeling on edge, feeling adrenalized. And it's familiar because it comes from family. Then that is familiar, and so we're drawn to the familiar. So I used to be drawn to edgy, drunk, druggy, unreliable, not consistent men until I healed. And then I was attracted to a reliable, consistent, stable person. But for years I wasn't. Boring, really boring. So I wanted to share those two things. Before I go on, does anyone have anything they want to share about what I've said? Do you relate to what I've said? You can pop something in the chat. If you would like to unmute, you can. Bear in mind, I am recording. It will go to our small group. Does anyone connect with or relate to or feel touched by anything that I've said or read? Do you find do you find healthy people boring? Do you find reliability, peace?
I laughed at that because that's so true. That somebody is consistent, that replies to a text within minutes and always turns up on time is like boring, you know. And so that really does ring true. And it's like, how do you know that what your preferences are as you know, are wrong? You just think they're your preference, don't you? And it takes a while to recognize that it's what you're familiar with, like you say. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and this is where, thank you, Eileen, for sharing that. And this is where the healing work is so important. You know, this is where the personal development work, the self-knowledge is so important, because then we start to question, oh, this feels familiar. Now, is that healthy familiar or unhealthy familiar? Yeah. But we start questioning ourselves, so that's what we need to do. We need to, like, as chapter 1 of my book says, step inside. We need to keep stepping inside. Like, who am I? Like, what are my patterns? Where have they come from? Have I been down this road before? Is this a familiar road? I'm just reading what's in the chat. If anyone else wants to say anything, you're welcome. Okay. Someone says, appreciate me saying we don't have to wait till fully healed to meet someone. I think I've just met someone. Great. Yeah, I remember, you might have heard me say this, I remember being in a big workshop seminar on codependency, and they were talking about all this healing stuff. And I'm like, when am I going to be well enough to have a relationship? And they said, get into the muddle, just give it a go. Now, I agree with that, but I also agree that we have to have our foundations in place first, because if we go dating with unhealthy foundations, we're going to re-traumatize ourselves, and then we won't want to try again. So we do need a good grounding. Yeah, so trying to figure out triggers, relating to the chaotic, unsafe environment. Yeah, not dating those men anymore. Great. And thank you. Yes. I like being honest and vulnerable. Yeah, loss is familiar, so I create it. Yeah, we recreate until we get well enough. We do naturally recreate what we know, what feels familiar, because it feels safe. It's all we've ever known. And the other thing, like for me, like my dad was emotionally unavailable, my mum was emotionally unavailable, very distant, couldn't connect to them emotionally. Mum had issues with alcohol, dad was doing his own crazy stuff. There was a lot of infidelity, it was quite chaotic. So that felt like, oh, well, this is home. This is home. And then you meet someone and you're like, oh, this feels like home. This feels like home. It's crazy, it's chaotic, it's unreliable. I don't feel seen or heard. I feel let down. Oh, this feels like home. This is really familiar. And it's only like as we get well that doesn't feel nice anymore. I mean, that's often why we get this chemistry, you know, the sort of sought after chemistry that we all want. Like, oh, this feels amazing because it feels like home. But we want to change our homes. You know what I mean? We want to create a different home inside of ourselves so that we are then attracted to something else. Let me just see what's in the chat. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to ask you, and you can either pop this in the chat or unmute and say out loud. I'd like to ask you what you think you need in order to have a healthy relationship, in order to find healthy love? What is it that you need? And I'm talking about kind of within yourself. So an example would be self-esteem or self-love. So what do you think you need in the bank, in your toolkit, in order to find and keep healthy love? Self-value, self-worth, confidence in self, sense of being worthy of a great love, acceptance of another's imperfections, loving self regardless of how others see me, believing I'm worthy, patience and ability to share truth, trust in one's own judgment, worthy of being loved and being able to communicate, thank you, self-acceptance. Keep going, and I'll share some that I came up with as well. So obviously self-esteem, self-worth, and as you heard from my story, that is a journey that takes time. You know, some of these wounds are so deep. It takes time, but we have to keep working on it, because we're all we've got. So self-love, self-esteem. I absolutely think that self-awareness, self-insight, you know, what we're talking about here, being aware of what someone's just shared, like our own patterns, like I normally run away, or I push people away, or I'm afraid of commitment. So being aware of one's own patterns, that, you know, that for me, one of our own wounds and our fears and our patterns, that is really important. Sorry, my dog's like probably listening to fireworks downstairs. Loving self, not needing to be a perfect version of self, receiving, not just giving, confidence, worthiness. So boundaries, yeah, feel I can say no when it doesn't feel right. Feeling safe to ask for what we want and need. Again, that's good boundaries, and you're all invited to the boundaries workshop that's coming up soon. Something else I came up with was courage, because those of you who know my work know I talk a lot about fear. So we need courage. Courage comes from heart, from the Latin for heart. So courage, we need a strong heart. And if our heart has been wounded in love, then it, you know, we're going to take a little bit of convincing to want to put our heart out there again. Vulnerability, I think someone shared about openness. So intimacy, I think I might have said this last time, intimacy, into me see. So if I am afraid of intimacy, if I'm afraid of intimacy, I am afraid of letting you see into me, because I don't think you'll like what you see. I don't want you to see this like brown, murky, horrible stuff I think I have inside. So I'm afraid of intimacy because I don't want you to see into me. And vulnerability is a prerequisite for intimacy. Honesty breeds intimacy. So I let you see into me because I believe that I am lovable. I believe that even though there are some like messy bits and wounded bits, like I believe that I am worthy and whole. Openness, vulnerability, courage. I wrote down sacrifice. I wonder how you feel about sacrifice. I guess in a relationship context, it's about give and take, negotiation. But this came to me today because on my journey to finding love, I needed to make lots of sacrifices in order to do this work that we are doing. And I appreciate you all being here. And I know some of you have just finished work, or people who aren't here are still working. But in terms of time and money, I had to make so many sacrifices. And I just want to share a little story. I used to work, as some of you know, I used to work in the Houses of Parliament. One of my jobs was going to number 10 Downing Street. I used to take a morning off from the Houses of Parliament and my important job to go and see a coach / mentor to sort out my stuff. And it was a real, it was a frightening thing to do, to say that I needed some mental health time. I had a personal appointment. It was difficult because of the job I was doing, but I often went to see this lady at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning when I should have been in the Houses of Parliament, because I absolutely prioritized my healing. And so I think for many of us, we have to make sacrifices if we really want to heal and find healthy love. And that might be time, it might be money, it might be, you might have to sacrifice, I don't know, I not necessarily, but we might have to sacrifice a dream in order to have a different dream. Maybe we can have all our dreams, but not everyone, I don't think. As in, not every person can have all their dreams. Some people can. It might look like everyone else can. So I want you to think about all those things that we've talked about: the self-knowledge, self-esteem, self-worth, self-love, self-awareness, courage, vulnerability, openness, sacrifice, healthy boundaries, all those things, and everything else that's come in the chat. And I'm just going to do a little breakout room. So let me just for 6 minutes or so. So 1, 2. Is anyone not want to participate in a breakout room? Which means you'll go into a room with one other person and you'll have a little chat, and the question will be, which area out of these areas do you think you need to build on? Self-worth, self-love, openness, vulnerability, courage, sacrifice, anything else that you saw in the chat. So it sounds like everyone's happy to, okay, so looks like Colette can't. So you just stay, if you can't do it, stay where you are. And so don't accept the invite. I'll just do it like that. If you don't want to go, don't accept the invite to go. Otherwise, I'm going to put you into, if I can find, if I can find the breakout rooms. Breakout room. Okay, I'm going to just, if you end up in a room on your own, I'll bring you back, so don't worry. Okay, and if you can't go, don't press. So when this happens, after somebody can share for about 3 minutes or less, I will then ask you to swap over, and then the other person can share, or you can just have a conversation. But the question is, which which foundation, I mean, some of you have done my foundations course, which foundation or which couple of foundations, which elements do you need to work on, do you think, in order to be more equipped to find healthy love? So let me do this. I'm going to do. Okay. Oh, some of you might be in threes. Okay, let me just see who's in which room. Got two there. Just Sonia, can I ask, are you on this Zoom twice, or do I have two Sonias? Sonia, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Let me just check. So let me just tell people if you're in a three. Okay, does anyone who's still in this main room want to speak or share anything or just reflect? Bear in mind that I can pause the recording actually for this bit. So everyone's back from their rooms, and I'd love you to share in the chat or by unmuting yourselves and speaking out loud, which will be recorded, anything that you found beneficial or that came up for you from conversation with the other person or people.
I had an unexpected one actually, because I thought what I was going to say, and then all of a sudden we had a wonderful conversation, and thank you, and then I found myself saying that the thing that caused me a lot of problems is I can become too nice and too kind and too lovely, and then it's hard to stop it and to pull back. And then you might have found that, I mean, you've got to speak to different people to find out if you are interested or you like them. But the more you do it, you can get sucked in and then not actually be spending time with somebody that's going to really in your best interest. You've now gone down another avenue, and then it's quite hard to get away from being nice and lovely and kind.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So the price of being too nice,
Yeah.
it comes at a cost, doesn't it? A cost to your time and your energy and your ability to move on. And I'm sure we've all been in relationships that we have let continue beyond their sell-by date, because I definitely have, because I've been afraid to let someone down, disappoint someone, hurt someone's feelings, and then they've gone on for months, years, weeks, beyond what they deserve. And in that time, my energy is gone, my focus, my attention, and it doesn't do the other person any favors either, does it? In fact, it's not kind in the end. Although our intention is good. I mean, I might be talking about a different situation to what you shared, but if I am stringing things along because I'm too scared to move on, then it's not in my interests or theirs.
I was actually referring to just the process of meeting people. And so just like an initial, oh, hello, how are you? And then you get into that. And then you can start thinking, oh, no, I'm not really sure, but oh, they're having a tough time, aren't they? Or they're this, that, and the other. Then suddenly you're sucked into being, because genuinely you're thinking, oh, that's horrible. But that's not necessarily what I need for me, if I was looking up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's courage to meet your own needs.
Yeah. Yes, because I think it links in then, because if it all starts up where you're not really on a level playing field, that's what will keep happening, won't it? Throughout the relationship, you're not actually getting your needs met.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And that relates to what was shared, somebody shared with me around needs. The courage to recognize that I have needs and identify them in relationships. What are my needs in relationships? Then what I suggest is we put that through a filter so that we try and distinguish between present day adult needs, legitimate present day adult needs, and the past. So, for example, if I might be dating someone and they disappear for a little bit, that would totally trigger my dad stuff, like I've been abandoned or rejected. So I have to process that dad stuff because this person isn't my dad, and it's not helpful to project my dad onto this person. So this person's absence is triggering my dad wound. I'm going to go away and I'm going to work through that. And then I'm going to identify what are my present day needs. I have to meet the child's needs myself because the ship has sailed. The parents have gone. Nobody's going to do that. I have to do that myself. And then once I've worked through the child's needs and met them myself and soothed myself and soothed that wound, then I can have a conversation in the present day, which is about my present day needs, my adult needs, and I can communicate in a healthy adult grown-up way. I hope that makes sense. It's about separating the past from the present and trying to get into our adult when we are communicating. So just in the chat, nice to have someone affirming my decision and prompt to trust my intuition. Great. And trying to be perfect, picking the perfect date, and then it doesn't work. And it's very disappointing. Everything seems so perfect. What more can I do? Yeah. I wonder if it would be helpful to try a very messy, imperfect date. Yeah, I just delivered a very messy, imperfect TEDx talk, which was like brutal, but was probably good growth experience, learning experience. Yeah. Does anyone else want to share anything that came up before I move on? Because what I'm going to move on to is Q&A. But just keep a little mental list of these elements that we talked about: self-worth, self-love, self-esteem, openness, vulnerability, courage, sacrifice, self-knowledge, absolutely vital. If we don't have the self-knowledge, we can walk around in denial. We can blame everyone else for our relationships not working out. We can blame the internet. We can blame the guys or the women or the people. And I'm not saying they don't have a part to play, but we can't do anything about that. We can't do anything. We can't change the internet, change the date, person. We can only take responsibility and change ourselves. So that's all we can do. So self-knowledge is so important. Yeah, so love languages can be different. we might speak in different love languages. Somebody shares in the chat. Yeah. And we can navigate that. That comes to, you know, that comes down to healthy communication, healthy boundaries, stating our needs and wants, understanding that we'll never find what we call perfect care. So remember, if we didn't get perfect care as children, we will have the fantasy of perfect care. And we will keep looking for it, and everyone will disappoint us. Everyone will disappoint us because we have a fantasy of perfect care and nobody will meet that. So we have to let go of the fantasy of perfect care, get back into our adult self, state our needs and wants in our adult place, adult voice, and then evaluate, like, does this person meet my adult needs? Because they're not going to meet the unmet childhood needs. I mean, they'll bring lots of nice things into our lives, but the early life wounds, they're not going to heal them. I mean, hurt happens in relationship, healing happens in relationship. So we will have some healing, but we have to do as much as possible to heal those early life wounds. Yeah. Yeah, I have to be aware of the fantasy of perfect care all the time in lots of situations. Like, even like if I get a client or I'm asked to go and speak somewhere, fantasy of perfect care, oh, they'll take care of everything, or they'll take responsibility for everything. No, I have to take responsibility for myself as an adult. So I'd like to move into questions, and I'll keep the recording on for a little bit while I run through some of the ones that I have. And then if you have any additional questions, please share in the chat. So I'm just going to start with, there's one at the start of the chat, and this is for you all to answer as well. How to find suitable men. I've tried online platforms, but not had any luck. So I'll just acknowledge that, you know, it's not easy. I don't think online dating is easy. I would always ask anyone about, how am I approaching those online platforms? How boundaried am I in my communication? How open and vulnerable am I? How are all those things we've just talked about? Am I courageous, open, vulnerable? Do I have self-knowledge? Because I could walk into, I know we're talking about online, but just to move it to the real world, I could walk into a party or go on holiday or go anywhere and go, oh, there's no nice men there, no nice men. Because I'm not saying this is any of you, but I personally was in denial about my own commitment phobia, fear of intimacy, fear of being trapped, suffocated, rejected, abandoned, wounded, hurt, left, dismissed, criticized, judged. I had all these fears. So of course I walk into a room of men with those fears, and I can't see anyone I find attractive, because I don't want to see anyone I find attractive, because if I do, I have to expose myself to these awful fears of rejection, abandonment. And if I get close to someone, I'm going to have to face those fears. So I'm just not going to see anyone. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I would make sure, first of all, that I've got my little checklist of, okay, I've got my self-esteem and self-worth. I'm feeling good enough in myself to have a really good profile, a really good picture. I've done my investment in myself. I haven't just put up some old picture. I've perhaps been open and vulnerable. I have shared my profile with others, other supportive, trustworthy people. You're welcome to do that in the Telegram group. I mean, I did this myself. I never shared my profile with any friends. It's too embarrassing. So have you been open and vulnerable and asked for help? At the same time, I would combine online with real life stuff. So is my life fulfilling? Do I feel happy in my life? Am I pursuing my dreams? Have I got good connections and good friends? Am I going out and about and meeting new people? So I probably haven't answered your question in a satisfactory way, but I can come back to it, and B, I would invite everyone else to share answers to that question in the chat, or you can unmute, how to find suitable men. There is a question about how do you go about finding, if you need to invest in deep therapy and counselling with childhood trauma, how do you go about finding the right therapist? I normally go by word of mouth. So if you don't know personally people who are in therapy, I would ask in our group, because I do all my therapy on Zoom now, even though my therapist is only an hour away. So I would ask for a recommendation. Otherwise, I would go to the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy and have a look at the profiles on there and find someone who feels right for me, and then do a bit like dating, ask for a couple of phone calls, a couple of trials, not whole trial sessions, because people wouldn't do that, but 10-minute calls. So when thinking about fears underneath, I was aware of loneliness and emptiness and feeling I will disappear if I make changes with my partner. Yeah, this does sound like the inner child. If you think about those stark, so emptiness kind of reminds me of, this is quite a big word, but annihilation. So as children, you'll have heard me say, if we don't get our needs met, we think we're not going to survive. And that's a very scary, lonely place to be. So, and the emptiness is kind of the hole in the soul. Sorry, that's my dog. The emptiness is the hole in the soul for me, which gets formed when we don't get the true connection that we need with our caregivers in early life. So whenever I feel those really like painful feelings, I think it is the childhood. I think it is the inner child. And yet, and I read somewhere, I mean, I read somewhere recently that maybe I just have to accept that the emptiness will kind of always be there. Not in a debilitating, awful way, but I still can at times feel empty inside, and I have a husband and a dog and a fulfilling career. And for me, that's the hole in the soul that was formed very early on in my life. And I can continue to do my self-love and self-compassion and have breakthroughs and feel that emptiness myself. It's a bit like grief. They say we grow around it. It doesn't go, we kind of grow around it. So there were a couple of questions, and I'd love you all to chime in on this one, because I have my own way of answering questions, obviously. So a question about what question should we be asking and wanting answers to by, say, date 3, in order to rule out time wasters, players, commitment phobes, etc. So I'm going to answer that initially in my own way, probably not in the way that you might want me to, because I'll have a think about that, the actual questions. But initially for me, it's much more about the feeling. It's much more about the connection that you are getting with yourself and your feelings and your intuition, and the connection that you are feeling with the person and the vibe that you are getting from that person. It's absolutely about trusting your instincts. not letting things go. So if that person says something that unsettles you in a message or oversteps your boundaries, so often we just ignore it, don't we? Because we really want a connection. We just ignore it. But we need to not necessarily like reject them, but call it out, like say, oh, you know, that thing that you said, can you just clarify what you meant? Because it didn't quite sit right with me. Or can you, or just full stop, can you just clarify what you said? Like give them the benefit of the doubt. So for me, it's less about the information that we get from someone and more about honoring ourselves, honoring our boundaries, speaking our truth. And we can talk more about this on the boundaries workshop. But, you know, questions to ask, you know, and I'd love you all to answer, and we can also continue this in the Telegram. Obviously, you know, you have an idea for your life. So if the idea for your life going forwards is to travel the world and have wonderful experiences, then you kind of want someone who's on a similar page, or you want to see that there's a capacity for negotiation, compromise. If your vision for your life is to have children or not to have children, I think that's an important one to feel out. I think it's really tricky to know when to talk about that. I really do. This is where you need to trust yourself and your intuition and believe that you are enough and that it's okay. If you're, you know, I'd want to know that they're completely single, but I suppose we don't, like, we assume in a way that people are, but you know, if they say that they're separated, well, what does that mean? Are they still like living with their ex, which happens a lot, you know? Like, I'd like to know the truth of their situation. Maybe like, what qualities are you looking for in a partner? You know, because in the past I wouldn't be honest about this, but I'd be looking for someone who was like really like, you know, successful, go-getting, daredevil, adventurous. And then once I had matured emotionally, I was looking for kindness. I was looking for kindness. So what qualities are they looking for? But if you have any ideas about that, I'd love you to share about that question, which is a good one. I'd love you to share them. But for me, it does come down to the feeling. I'm just going to see what's in the chat. Complicated and multifaceted to find suitable men. Yeah, I agree. Not to have really long conversations online if we can avoid it, because that can build a false intimacy. And then when we show up, we get really disappointed. I've done that. Exactly, you know, that's what, when we're asking people questions or communicating with people, we want to remain in the position of choice. Like, we are choosing them as much as we want them to choose us. And that's where our self-esteem and self-worth is so important. There's some good questions there. How recently are they out of a relationship? What are they looking for? What are their values? What's important to them? Yeah, where do they see themselves in the future? Okay, so someone shares about not listening to their intuition at the 3-month point, and you know, it's so easy and natural to not listen to our intuition, and that's where it comes to asking ourselves, what is our level of hunger? You know, you've heard me say, you know, if we're dating with a craving, if we're dating with hunger for attachment, we will override our intuition. So how can we turn down the volume on our hunger for attachment, on our hunger for connection? And we do that by healing our early life wounds, doing this work, We do that by making sure there are really good connections in our lives outside romantic relationships, by having a really good connection with ourselves, talking to the inner child, talking to that emptiness that might be there. And again, you know, people can tell us untruths. I believe that you all, especially if we've had challenging upbringings, we tend to have a really strong intuition and we tend to ignore it. So I have both those things. So I have a really strong intuition, which comes from growing up around alcoholism, addiction, dysfunction. My intuition is like, what do I need to do around here to stay safe? Okay, I've got it. I need to be good, perfect, brilliant, pretty, thin. My intuition tells me they're about to have an argument or something bad's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to stay small. I'm going to stay quiet. So we have a very strong intuition. But then when I intuitively spoke up in that chaotic environment and spoke my truth, and it was shouted down and I was told that I was wrong at the age of 7, then I lose faith in my intuition. I don't trust my intuition. So we might have a very strong intuition and we might struggle to trust it. We want to get better at trusting that intuition, believing that it is strong and that is right. The other thing that happens in our childhoods is, as children, we have to believe that the adults around us are right and doing things right and they've got stuff sorted. Otherwise, we won't survive. So we believe that they're right. And because things aren't as they're supposed to be, we have to believe that we're wrong. So parents are doing great. I must be the one who's wrong. And that's something that we do until we understand that they were wrong. Bless them, forgive them, but they were wrong and our intuition was right. So I'm just going to answer one more question that I have, and then I'll switch the recording off unless you have any more you want to pop in the chat, and then you can unmute and have a chat, or you can unmute now as well if you have a question. How to stop running away, pushing people away, how to stop letting our fear sabotage our relationships. Progress, like it's a process. Some of you have done this work with me. If you've been on a course or done coaching, we identify all of our fears. So we stir them, we look them in the eyes. So I am afraid of commitment, intimacy, being seen, being heard, being judged, being criticized, being abandoned, being rejected, being suffocated, being left, being lost, being abandoned, dying. You know, we get really clear on all our fears so that they're really, you know, we know what they are. And then we try and soothe them. And it takes time. And that's why we try and proceed carefully and cautiously into relationships, knowing that we're afraid. You know, I have fear of success, which is partly why I probably sort of sabotaged my TEDx talk. You know, and I've been working on this for a long time. So we can sabotage our relationships because we're afraid of real connection. Because what did that feel like when we were children? That felt painful. It brought abandonment and loss and so forth. So I'm aware of the time. I can stay on for a little bit. Oops, I've lost the time. Okay, just one question, one comment there. Speaking of truth, that links to intuition. Yeah. So if it hasn't been safe in the past to speak our truth, then it's very hard to find our voice. Yeah, to practice finding our voice. So I mean, this is a very simple example, but you know, I often say to people, when you're finding your voice, like find it in really simple ways and practice it. Like if your soup shows up in the restaurant and it's cold, send it back. If somebody stands on your toe, don't just stand there and let them stand on your toe. Say, excuse me, you're standing on my toe. Like I used to struggle to say that. Just keep practicing using your voice in really simple ways. And dating is a great way to practice using your voice, because although it feels like so much is at stake because we might have a hunger for connection and craving, actually we don't know this person, we've never met this person, and we might not see this person again. So let's practice having a voice. Does anyone have any other questions they want me to answer on the recording? Otherwise, I'm going to switch the recording off. And if anyone needs to go, because we are at time, then please go. I can be here for another 5 minutes or so. Okay, I'm going to switch the recording off because we're at time. And then any other questions you can ask me. Just to wrap up, to those watching on Catch Up and here, continue this conversation in the Telegram group. Think about all these elements, the things that we want to work on. Ask these questions like, what questions do I need to ask on a date? How do I overcome my fear? Ask them of me and of each other, and brainstorm your ideas, because you've got a huge pool of wisdom here. So and you've also got, you can give each other courage. You can give each other courage to have a difficult conversation, set boundaries, ask for your needs to be met. So I'm going to wrap up with close the recording.